Hello, Aaron Kubitz, personal trainer at Functional Aesthetics EC. We're helping average guys perform better in their lives inside and outside the gym. In today's video, I'm going to discuss how you can become a fat burning machine versus a sugar burning machine. So over the past 10 years, the term fat burner versus sugar burner has become quite popular, with people using terms like fat burn or fat adapted, things like that. Now, besides from the obvious of meaning that you are relying on more fat for fuel versus sugar or carbohydrates for fuel, how exactly do you become a fat burner versus a sugar burner? So first and foremost, we have to go and talk a little bit about how the body processes different nutrients like carbohydrates and fats. So carbohydrates are the body's preferred short-term energy source. So it burns really hot and really intense, but it's only a short-term fuel source. Fat, on the other hand, can burn for a long time, but not quite as intensely. So when you're doing long distance running, when you're going on a long hike, when you're doing manual labor jobs, most of what you're burning when you're doing that is fat, provided you are not eating excessive amounts of sugar, drinking a lot of pop, alcohol, or eating a lot of refined grains. These things can negatively affect your hormones, making you rely more heavily on sugar and have a lower ability to burn fat. Which brings me into my first point of how can you transition from becoming a sugar burner to being a fat burner, which ultimately can help you to burn more body fat if you do it right. So the first thing that you want to do, because I'm always an advocate of transitioning slowly in incremental steps to have sustainable long-term progress, rather than making drastic changes which may not be sustainable in the long term because you have not learned the rhyme and reason behind why you're doing what you're doing, and if it's too extreme, it may become unsustainable. It's like Nietzsche said, if you understand the why, you can endure almost any what. If you understand what's going on in your body, even if you feel uncomfortable, if you understand that you're not going to die from it, if you understand the science, then you're more likely to persist with it in the long haul rather than throw in the towel thinking that your body is going to be destroyed by doing this. If you understand that this is just a short-term adaptation, then you're more likely to persist with it. So, without further ado, the first point that I wanted to make is the way that you transition to becoming a fat burner was first and foremost to eliminate refined grains, sugar, pop, and alcohol from your diet. Replace that instead with quality carbohydrates, whole food sources of carbohydrates, eating oatmeal, beans, and not like Bush's beans with added sugar and stuff like that in it, just regular plain beans. You can add seasonings and stuff like that to it if you want to make it more palatable to you. But over time, your body will learn to appreciate these more subtle flavors that don't need to be heavily doctored up with excessive amounts of salt and sugar to make them taste good. Not to mention other chemicals that, restaurants and food manufacturers tend to add to their food. So that's the first thing that you want to do. Beans, oatmeal, sweet potatoes, rice, all these type of things are going to be are going to cause a more gradual rise in your blood sugar. What that does is helps to stabilize insulin. Now, there's an inverse relationship between insulin and another hormone called human growth hormone. Insulin is an anabolic hormone, which means that it is responsible for storage of nutrients and fuel, and also the growth of lean tissues and adipose tissues at the same time. Human growth hormone, on the other hand, in addition to numerous other benefits, one of its benefits is that it is a fat-burning hormone as well. But the problem is that when insulin is elevated, human growth hormone is suppressed and vice versa. So in order to be burning more fat for fuel and less sugar for fuel, you need to have a way to stabilize that insulin. When you're causing a more gradual rise in blood sugar, the insulin is going to be more stable. It's not going to have to spike up super high to absorb this massive influx of sugar that's coming in. When it's trickle charging in, the insulin is going to come up a little bit, then it's going to fall like it naturally should do. This is going to cause you to have less cravings for sugar overall, and when you're exercising, it's going to cause you to have more energy and sustained endurance by not having to rely as much on sugar. When you can rely more on fat, you can go longer, for a longer duration before fatiguing and hitting the wall, because you're going to be sparing your glycogen stores in your muscles and in your liver. So glycogen is just carbohydrate that is stored in skeletal muscle and in your liver. And if you're eating too much sugar, you're relying too much on the carbohydrates. So as soon as you run out of that sugar, your body's going to start stripping it out of the muscles and the liver rapidly, causing you to hit the wall faster. You can extend out the period of time when that you can exercise and maintain a high level of performance when you don't need to rely as much on sugar. So that would be the first thing. Just simply transitioning to eating a more whole foods diet, also having balance as well. You want to make sure that you are having a balance between carbohydrates, proteins, and fats as well. Because even if you're eating whole food sources of carbohydrates, they are more satiating, but you can go a step further by also having protein combined with your carbs. So having the basic balanced diet, right? If you're having eggs and oatmeal with blueberries in the morning, right? Maybe throw a little flax seeds in there as well if you want. You can have, steak and potato with a side of broccoli or asparagus or Brussels sprouts or green beans. And that can be, and even put like a little pat of butter on the potato as well. That'll further help to slow the entry of carbohydrates into your system. So that's the first place to start. Now, after doing that, a lot of people will notice simply because they're eating less calories that they end up, because they have less hunger because of these less fluctuations of blood sugar, that they'll end up eating less calories. And this will cause them to drop body fat, okay? However, after a while of doing this, you might notice that you still want to drop more body fat. It might not be enough to simply transition to eating more whole foods. Now, that might be a good place if you are trying to maintain your weight and you're not trying to lose any body fat. But if you have the desire to lose body fat, and this is why I always say eating healthy doesn't necessarily mean losing weight, right? Eating healthy sometimes causes you to lose weight. If you've been used to eating a lot of processed refined foods, when you transition to eating more whole foods, you just simply can't eat as much because it's more filling and satiating due to, the hormone stabilization, more fiber, water, etc. However, to get into a deficit, to really start carving away that body fat, you might need to go a step further. And this is where they talk about the fat burn state, right? So, as I talked about before, there's an inverse relationship between insulin and human growth hormone. So, in order to start burning fat in a rapid manner, you have to try to keep that insulin level or the blood sugar levels low so that human growth hormone can be activated and you can start tapping into those fat stores. If you have plenty of carbohydrates available, whether it's from sugar or otherwise, there's no real reason for your body to burn body fat because it has plenty of fuel to carry on all of the activity of its day without doing that. So the first thing that I would do is you can do a lower carbohydrate diet. And typically to start getting into a fat burning state, you want to be reducing your calories down to 100 grams of carbohydrates or less. For some people, you might even have to go 50 grams or less of carbohydrates. 50 grams of carbohydrates is about the equivalent of 1 cup of rice worth of carbohydrates for the entire day. If you're a very small person, you might have to go less than that in order to get into this fat burning state. Also, if you've been eating a lot of processed refined grains, pop, sugar, and alcohol, you may have become something that's called insulin resistant. So you might need to go even lower in order to kickstart your body into that fat burning state because when you have insulin resistance, you have a harder time, your hormones are all out of whack, and so you have a harder time for the body to actually act in a natural way. So an easy way to do this, in one way that I actually transitioned to doing this myself unintentionally, was by doing something called carbohydrate backloading. Now, carbohydrate backloading is, and the reason that I did this, actually I'll tell you what it is and then I'll say the reason that I did it. So, carbohydrate backloading is simply where a lot of times, in traditional, meal plans, you'll be having carbohydrate-rich foods early in the day. You have your breakfast cereals, pancakes, waffles, hash browns, all that kind of stuff. It's typically considered breakfast-type foods, and then higher protein and fat foods are typically considered more dinner-type foods, right? Now, when I first started studying bodybuilding back in 2005, it was, highly promoted to reduce your carbohydrate consumption in the evening, relying more on vegetables and proteins in the evening because you were not going to be as active in the evenings, thus you didn't want to produce as much carbohydrate or have as much carbohydrate in your system then. The problem that I've found with this is that if you're cutting your carbs and or calories, oftentimes it's very hard to fall asleep in the evening. Additionally, if you hit your calorie or carbohydrate limit and you can't eat anymore, then you're kind of screwed because you're feeling hungry and now you can't fall asleep, but you've already used up your calorie limit. Another thing that's involved here too is that carbohydrates, particularly complex carbohydrates, so things that have, that take a slower time to break down, like glucose, as opposed to straight up sugar, those tend to promote the production of serotonin, which helps you feel more relaxed, happy, and content, which is a good thing before bed. Also, if you combine it with moderate amounts of low-fat proteins and even calcium-containing foods, you can further increase the effect of having that serotonin effect. Now, contrast that with high-fat and protein foods tend to increase the levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine, which is associated with motivation, energy, and drive and focus, something that is great during the day, but not so good when you're trying to fall asleep. So if you want to have more energy during the day, a good thing to do is start to keep those carbohydrates lower during the first part of the day, and then towards the evening, you can, if you need to, have a slightly lower fat meal balanced with protein and complex carbohydrates to help you feel more relaxed and to help you fall asleep. Now, people will think that, okay, if I'm eating carbohydrates right before bed, it's going to prevent me from burning fat. There is some truth to the fact that you don't want to eat too much food right before bed, simply because it can disrupt your sleep cycles and throw off your hormone production as well. So if insulin levels are elevated, your human growth hormone will tend to be suppressed. And human growth hormone is typically secreted the most in a couple hours right after you fall asleep. So you don't want to have it battling with a lot of insulin, right? Now, with that being said, I would rather take my chances with a little bit of dysregulation of the hormones from having those carbohydrates in the evening than to be too wired to fall asleep because of having too low levels of serotonin and melatonin in the evening because of the low calorie state of the carbohydrates. Another thing that people will say is that, well, you eat all this food before bed, it's going to convert to fat because you're sleeping and you're not doing anything with it. Well, unless you're eating straight up sugar, most of the food that you eat will not be used immediately after you eat it. Especially, and furthermore, unless your glycogen stores are already full in your liver and your muscles, as I talked about before, the carbohydrates that you eat, if you don't use them right away, they will be stored in your liver and your skeletal muscle as glycogen. Now, if those stores are already full, as is the case when you're when you're not active and you're eating a lot of processed refined sugars and the other things that I mentioned, then it will tend to spill over into the fat stores because this fuel tank is already full, so it has to go into the long-term fuel tank, which is your fat stores. However, if you're depleting your carbohydrates all day and you're in a energy deficit, i.e. you're not taking in enough calories to support your activity levels, then this is not something that you need to worry about. It's not going to convert to fat because you're in a deficit and has to replenish the glycogen fuel tanks before it can go to fat stores. By backloading your carbohydrates and eating lower carb in the morning, this is actually a great segue into fasting, because fasting and low carbohydrate diets basically work on a very similar principle. When you fast for a couple days, your body's going to deplete its glycogen stores and have to rely on fat, right? Now, the same thing happens when you are on a low carbohydrate diet. You're still eating food, but you're not eating carbohydrates, so those glycogen stores start to get depleted. Now, a lot of people say, I could never fast. I could not skip meals and stuff. And that's usually because your body has to rely on sugar. It's a sugar burner, right? Now, by backloading those carbohydrates towards the end of the day, eating that fat and protein in the beginning, and this is actually what I was saying, sharing my experience, I was saying I was going to do at the beginning of this video, right? This is actually how I transitioned to doing fasting, is I noticed that, so growing up, I ate a lot of cereal and stuff like that in the morning for breakfast. Well, I got a job where I had to get up very early in the morning for work, and it was too early, so I was tired. And I noticed that these, because of that serotonin production, I didn't know it at the time, but that was the reason, and the calcium from the milk, it made me feel more sleepy. And so I decided that I was going to remove those carbohydrates, eat a egg and veggie omelet instead in the morning to keep myself, from feeling too relaxed and satisfied. I didn't know it at that point, but what I was doing was reducing serotonin and increasing dopamine. And it did have that effect to make me have more drive, energy, and motivation throughout the day. Now, after, several weeks to a month or whatever, this is many years ago, I can't remember exactly what the length of time was, but one morning I woke up and I just wasn't hungry for breakfast, so I skipped it. And this is how I kind of fell into the practice of fasting during the day, because I found that, hey, I can actually function at a much higher level, because most of the activity that I'm doing during the day is not high intensity exercise like sprinting, lifting weights, and jumping, or playing soccer or football or basketball, or any of these kind of high intensity activities that would require that high octane fuel that you get from carbohydrates. So I actually found that my brain was more clear, because I actually struggled with ADD my whole time growing up. And I could focus better. I had, instead of this erratic energy, I was more stable and focused, which is great for being an adult and working a job. And so over time, that's what happened. And this is why I say, before trying to do fasting, you want to do two other things. First, get your, transition to eating a healthy, balanced diet first. Get a solid foundation of eating whole foods, less processed junk. If you still want to see further weight loss after that, then transition to doing something of a low carbohydrate diet. And if you still, for various different reasons, want to try the fasting, then try the fasting. It's going to be much easier after you've balanced your blood sugar from first doing the balanced diet, then the low carbohydrate diet, and it's a natural segue into fasting. Now, the one caveat to this, and this is the last thing that I'm going to say before ending this video, is that a lot of people, or many people, after being on a ketogenic diet for, and seeing great results after several weeks to several months, will all of a sudden notice that they're not losing any more weight, or even starting to gain some of that weight back. And the reason for this is that when you first start doing a low carbohydrate diet, or even a ketogenic sort of diet, you're eating typically about 70% of your calories from fat. A lot of times people be eating a lot of bacon, even if they're eating other healthy fats and stuff, they're eating a lot of fat and a lot of calories in general. And because their body's not used to burning fat for fuel, and they're not getting the carbohydrates, in essence their body is starving because it hasn't transitioned over to being a fat burner yet. So it's still a sugar burner, and it's not getting any sugar. So even though you're still eating food, you're still starving because your body hasn't transitioned over to burning the fat. And this is why people who are diabetic are actually in this starvation state if they don't get insulin shots, because the cells in their body are resistant to the insulin, so it can't let the insulin into the body or into the cell, the insulin won't allow the sugar into the cell to feed and nourish the body. So after your body transitioned to being a fat burner after several weeks to, months or whatever, if you're eating too many calories in general, whether it's fat or carbohydrates, and a lot of times people are eating a lot of fat and a lot of calories and not counting the calories because initially it was working. Now, once your body has become adapted to burning the fat, if you're eating too many calories, you're still not going to lose weight, or maybe even gain weight if you're eating excessive amounts of calories, because now your body has adapted to become efficient at burning that fat. And if you're taking in too much fat through your diet, it's going to burn that fat and not the fat that's on your body. So guys, hopefully that kind of cleared some things up for you on the difference between being a fat burner and a sugar burner, and how to enter a fat burning state, transitioning from relying primarily on sugar to relying more on fat, making it so that you can have more endurance, clearer focus, and more easily burn your body fat. If you like this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. It really helps out the algorithm, helps out people who would likely benefit from more of this content. And if you would like to see more content like this on how to burn fat, build muscle, or eat to enhance athletic performance, as well as structuring workout routines, how to train around injuries and avoid injuries from happening in the first place, Then consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the button in the lower right hand corner of the screen, and we'll see you all next time for more health and fitness related information. Thanks guys for watching.